Painting outside totally started out as a way of having fun. Like when people are grinding, when there's activated dance, that just blows my mind.
You cannot guarantee understanding the public. There's a certain quotient that's completely unpredictable.
But it's important to me that we actually use public space because it's public and because it's free and because we get to do whatever we want there.
Hello, my name is Hayuk. I live in Brooklyn. Thank you for having me, by the way. This is really cool. So let's see, I am Ukrainian. My parents came over during World War II when they were kids, and I was growing up with my grandmothers teaching me crafts that were Ukrainian Easter eggs and embroidery and all these patterns that I started to realize over time were a very universal language and a very anonymous one made mostly by women. And I started working off of those patterns, and I'm giving you like the tip of the iceberg of everything that I'm interested in I do, but this is about, let's see, this is almost 10 years ago in Braddock, Pennsylvania. And okay, it's gonna skip around in a really funny way, so I hope you like nonlinear thought. I studied at Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture. It was pretty much the really like only academic, heavy academic education I had. And one of the things I busted through from painting walls and working whatever in photography and with music and stuff was working off of these woven patterns. And anyway, so I'm just gonna, okay, this was in the Bonnefanten Museum in Maastricht. I was partnered with Mary Heilman to work on 2 concurrent solo shows, and what I like to do is riff really hard and make things up as I go along. I like to enter spaces and go to hardware stores and paint stores and pick out the mistints and play off of the collective consciousness of people who have returned paints that were wrong, and I'll take that whole group of paints and paint paintings off of those. This is not the case with this painting, although it is all very much improvised. This is at the Hammer Museum last year, 2013 rather, and this is an installation I painted there. This is a chemical trail I thought was kind of hilarious, and all of these resulting pattern woven structures I started naming chemical trails over the years. Here is a bit more of this language and process. This is in Miami. There's my dad. These are, okay, this was in Charleroi, and that's me in the very bottom right under the numeral 3. So this was a new kind of process for me where it was the first painting I'd made outdoors that was not improvised, and I actually had to plan it all out, and I was working on 4 scissor lifts with 4 assistants, and it was the first time I really changed my mode of operation to involving other people who couldn't be mad that I was, it was a massive scaled thing. It was pretty fun. Okay, so this was an old tag I did forever. I painted with the Barnstormers. This is, it's important and relevant, I guess, in the sense that I was making a drawing of what paint looks like when it's dripping. And it's a donut. And I started painting with different collectives, mainly the Barnstormers, who work in this very collective improvisational way, and it completely changed my painting. This was a project I was doing for a long time on Kent and Metropolitan. The building is gone now, but it was called Monster Island, and it was 3 stories of artist studios and galleries and screen printing, music studios, and so forth. And I asked the landlord if I could cover the graffiti, which resulted in this very amazing 7-year process where I had all this extra paint. I had a lot of friends who painted, and I would invite them, or they would contact me, and we would paint all over these walls. The criteria for painting was that we wouldn't really use spray paint, we wouldn't tag necessarily, and we would riff off of the person before us. There was no like buffing out and then painting into a square. It was all about this generative process. And I guess it's worth noting I lived in San Francisco for a long time, and it's where I was really inspired also by the kind of paint that was being put outside on the street that had really nothing to do with graffiti. It had much more to do with, or it was much more inspired by Mexican mural traditions and activism and things that I kind of outside of hip hop, but not necessarily correlated to hip hop. So this was at the Scope Art Fair a couple of years ago. It was really cold. These are some really old murals. That's from a broken JPEG when I was transferring one from iMovie HD to iMovie something else. It was terrible, but this was a screen grab and this was at the Democratic National Convention. I made this installation where you could go inside. I don't know if I'm going too fast or whatever. This is my, this was an installation in, at MU in Eindhoven in the Netherlands with Ben Wolf, and I built all of these spaces that were based on the ultra deep fields that the Hubble telescope discovered, and painted these walls. This was the interior of that space. And there was a soundtrack that a lot of my friends contributed to and a CD that was distributed. And this was at the Bonnaroo Music Festival. You can sort of see scale. There's a dude laying there on the ground where that eyeball is. It's about 80 feet across. That was a good time. And that's it in action. It was a fountain of people. I didn't get to be there for that, which I'm totally grateful for, because and this is right around the corner on Milton Street. I think it's gone or lovingly destroyed by now, but it was a Rai Rai MIA video, and that just blows my mind. Like when people are grinding, when there's activated dance awesomeness against something I've painted that makes it's so great. This was in Rio de Janeiro. I created these installations. It's Wayne Coyne from the Flaming Lips commissioned me to paint this in Oklahoma City a few years ago. Oh, and this was in the town of Skowhegan, where I did some really fun riffing on the walls there. And then when we finally lost our lease at Monster Island, I gathered all my friends, I watered down all the paint, everybody got up on the roof. It was September 11th of 2011 in broad daylight in the middle of the day, and we built these troughs, and we poured all the paint down over the mural project that had been going for like 7 years at that point. And it was really awesome and poetic and beautiful that we got to draw the curtain over our work. It wasn't killed by a wrecking ball. It was fully reclaimed by us. So that was a really important moment. These are all, there's Kobe. Yeah, okay, I'm gonna go fast now. This was in Perth, Australia last year. This is a project that I do with my friend Sid Vaga, who's a house DJ, and he put out this vinyl, and I made this packaging for out of screen printed screen prints. These are walls from 2013. This was in Toronto. It was about 300 feet long. This was the Bowery Wall, which was, I guess, the thing that I have done in New York that has had the most impact, or is people are aware of. I've been here for 13 years, and this was a huge, huge honor for me to realize. And I did it during the polar vortex last year, during the winter. It was brutally gnarly. It was wonderful. And a few days after I completed it, it got really badly tagged, or beautifully tagged, or horribly tagged. So I went over all the areas where the tags were, and I pixelated it kind of like razzle-dazzle battleships, where it was sort of related to the graffiti and honoring it, you know, and going over it, making it totally impotent as well. But I kept little bits of the graffiti throughout. So I guess it was the end result of this painting is exciting to me because it's actually better than it was before. And that's me. And that's while I'm painting. And okay, and this was just now in Hawaii, in Honolulu. I was invited And I got to paint over this wall, and it was a huge hassle for me to paint directly over MSK crew, who I taught, are friends, and I was like, hey, will it be okay? And they were fine with it, but I literally X'd them out. And so this ran for a few days, and this language very much has to do with that Xing out process of graffiti, but in a loving, loving way. So this took a few days. It's not a car advertisement, but I just don't have a shot. That's a close-up, super wet, super drippy. I guess that's it. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Heather Hart, and I'm just going to go over a couple of projects that I have on slide because we don't have too much time, but there's a couple of themes that I work with in my work. One is this kind of these forms that evoke a primal response without us having firsthand experience or engagement with them. Maybe not any logical relationship exists between you and the form, but there's something visceral that comes up when you see them. It's conceivable, now that they've done these studies about DNA, that that might be leftover trauma or attraction from forefathers. So I'm really interested in forms and materials that are passed down through bequeathment, through oral history, something that you can't necessarily learn from school, but you have to learn from an apprenticeship or your father. The other theme that runs through my work a lot is the idea of kind of liminality and relativity, that somebody can experience a space, the same space at the same time even, and have a completely different perception to it because they bring their own frames of reference. So I like to bring this little, is it blue or is it white kind of dress, because it's kind of exactly what I'm talking about in my work. So this is an example of a piece that I did actually with Kickstarter funding at the Brooklyn Museum. And the rooftop is kind of a recurring form for me. It's between the sky and the earth. It protects, but it's also a truncated version of a house, right? So it seems like it's kind of in a dangerous spot per se. The viewers could climb on top of it or crawl underneath it. And inside, they always find something to participate with, in this case, a shrine. So the form of a house, my father's a carpenter. I grew up building things with him. So the first iteration of this house I did from my memory. And then I got better as the northern oracles, eastern, western oracle came to be. Inside this shrine was a mirror, as you see in the center there. The form was taken from the Egyptian collection from the museum downstairs and kind of blown up. So when a viewer came, they would press a piece of gold to the shrine in exchange for their wish, kind of like a Buddhist temple where you press a piece of gold to the Buddha in exchange for your prayer, their offering. But of course, instead of pressing it to a Buddha, they're looking at themselves when they're pressing the gold on there. So it's creating this kind of reflective space, something to reclaim this power that you look for outside of yourself. And eventually, the space transforms, of course, with evidence of people's wishes as the mural turns gold. Another rooftop, a little more recently in Seattle, outdoors. I grew up in Seattle, so this was kind of like the home going home, which was great. In the Olympic Sculpture Park, looking on to Puget Sound. So every time I do a piece, it's definitely site-specific. I like to be influenced by the history, the culture, my experience, what I see, but always with my own perspective. But it's important to me to have the piece is open enough for people to bring their own frames of reference. And therefore, it stretches the identity of the piece itself with their own experience. So somebody might have like a memory of climbing on top of their garage to get a ball that's lost, whereas another person could have experienced Katrina and have a more kind of emotional experience with it. But it's also physically a new perspective. So you climb on top of this rooftop that might be 15 feet in the air on the long side, and you're physically in a different perspective, different space. So inside of this rooftop, the shrine was site-specific. It was built out of traditional style Squaxin elk hide drums, so you could go and kind of pound out your prayer to the Puget Sound, which was historically the port that Native Americans would come in to trade. One of the things that I'm always interested in is collaborating with other people for public programs. So I see this public program opportunity as another way to stretch the identity of my pieces, to kind of let them take a new life in different directions. Had a second line band for the opening of this piece, and so they led the whole audience up into the roof. We had Buto dancers that took on the roof, and a collaboration with Quentin Morris and Donald Byrd. Another form that I've used a lot is the porch. So literally between the house and the field, right? It's this space of transition. So originally this form was inspired by a Charles Chestnut novel that was about, he was a Black author, and he wrote with his character Uncle Julius, which was an uncle character typically written by white authors, Uncle Tom, Uncle Remus. So he used this character as kind of a reclamation of that literary figure of the kind of magical Negro character. And within the storyline, within the plot, Uncle Julius begins telling stories to the master of the house, and because his stories are so enthralling, the master invites him closer and closer into the house until by the end of the story, he's in the house eating the master's food. So again, the porch exists as this space of reclamation. I invited the viewers to climb on top of it, but they could also go underneath where there were labyrinths, and there were two destination points. One was to listen to oral histories on an iPad, and the other was to input your own oral history, which then got fed back into the original archive. And I, of course, did a ton of public programming. This curator was really ambitious. Usually I come to a curator with like 20 fantasy ideas for programming, and they choose like 2 or 4. This one chose like 4 a week. So we got, we had a film night every week. We had a book club that met, yoga. We had Habitat for Humanity came and spoke. And there was also like a town hall meeting and university clubs that had their weekly meeting on the porch. The next piece I'm going to show you is the Numinous Negro piece. I've been doing this kind of in transformations over quite a few years. And it was inspired by that archetype of the magical Negro, the Black character in a narrative that exists solely to provide guidance and truth to the white protagonist. So kind of unpacking that character, challenging it, examining it. The Numinous Negro was a term coined by Richard Brookhiser in 2001 about Obama. So it kind of updated that archetype a bit. You can still see it in movies today, like Morgan Freeman plays the Numinous Negro a lot. So I built this cast of a friend's head that existed almost exactly like a Buddha would, where people had to come and kneel and press a piece of gold onto the head in exchange for their wish. And eventually, through the run of the show, the head turned gold. So is it enabling a negative stereotype of Black archetypes, or is it kind of giving your power over to this person? So it's this slippery area, that liminal space. I finally did this with a real person. My collaborator, Andre, who's a dancer, performance artist. And so there was certain, signals that we had as to how to interact with him. He existed at the end of a labyrinth. So people chose how they wanted to interact with him, whether it was to just not interact, whether to press a piece of gold onto a shoe and run away, or actually consult him. And most recently, this piece is up now in Charlotte. I built a kind of a stoop-like structure, throne kind of thing, where he could exist and consult with the public. That's all I have for you.
Hey everyone, can you hear me? Good. My name's Jeff Stark. Thanks for coming. I work almost entirely collaboratively. Most of my projects are done with other people. I work in public space a lot. I also work in private spaces. I also work in places that we're not supposed to go. Tonight I'm going to talk about two projects. One of them is a project that I just finished in November. It was called The Dreary Coast. The Dreary Coast was a theatrical installation. You could call it a play. It was a play. I tend to think of it as a moving installation and specifically a site-responsive installation. The Dreary Coast happened a block and a half from my house on the Gowanus Canal. The Gowanus Canal is a horribly polluted industrial canal in Brooklyn. You guys probably know it. The Newtown Creek is kind of the same thing on this side. And it's a super fun site. It's a place of deep contention about what it will be in the future. It's rapidly changing above 4th Street. It's slowly changing below 4th Street. And it's my contention that artists and all of us should be participating in public spaces in order to show the way that we would like these spaces to be used. I think that artists have a responsibility to identify new places to work and identify new places for culture and cultural transformation. So The Dreary Coast was a 3-week-long play. It featured about 50 different artists in collaboration. That includes actors, musicians, costumers, set builders. And it was a play that happened on a boat. And there were 2 audiences on this boat. There are 2 audiences for this play. Every night there were 18 people who got on this boat with our lead character, who's Karen, the boatman on the river Styx. And you would navigate up the canal with this character, and you would stop at various points. Karen would meet characters along the way, and as you moved throughout the canal, a narrative would unfold. The story was more or less the story of Orpheus and Eurydice, also sort of employing pieces of the Persephone myth, so sort of deep myths. This is the middle of the canal. It's a place that's actually extremely hard to see. You cannot see this place from any public access point. But the strange thing about this is, like a lot of water in New York City, this point is a public space. And so one of the things that I hope that this play does, or hope that this show or this installation does, is it allows you to identify new places in New York City. This is moving toward the northern end of the canal, right where we would turn around, and moving underneath the bridges. And I work a lot of times trying to identify specific places along the canal or along a location to employ the architecture and the space within the narrative of the show. So for example, in one scene, you are ostensibly on this boat, you have more or less died, and you're moving through the underworld. In one place, we witness a funeral that is happening, and that funeral is kind of crossing a bridge, and as we come to the bridge, you go under the bridge, and you are able to sort of hear all of these singers in this procession as you pass under. There's a secondary audience that would follow the play each night from land and hitting up at different points. They could listen to the whole show via live FM pirate radio. A couple different shots. We had some really incredible actors and really great elaborate costumes. This is the single private space along the whole canal, and we were eventually removed from this space by NYPD, and we had to start ending our play at a different point. One of the things that I like about this is that you actually really get to expand the sense of what can happen in the play or the way that we identify. For me, this looks like a pretty traditional play. And then you open up and we sort of see the macro sense, and you see the New York City subway passing over above us. You see all of these sort of industrial remains throughout the neighborhood. Also, there are these incredible features that you would never be able to see otherwise. I'm deeply influenced by Gordon MATTA-CLARK, who worked with New York City and thought about different ways of engaging with it. I'm also deeply inspired by REZA ABDOH, who is a theater maker, playwright, who worked in New York City in the meatpacking district and also some sort of stranger transitional spaces. But I'm more influenced by my friends and my community who I make work with all the time. This is Julia SOLIS, who works with a group called Dark Passage. She's interested in the idea of making art in these kind of spaces as a way of creatively preserving them as they transition into other spaces or go away forever. Sarah McMillan is another collaborator of mine. This is a play called a performance piece called Snow Migration, which was coordinated to happen on the first snow of the year. So everything was in place. We were simply waiting for the first snow. As the first snow happened, everything clicked in, and we were able to move 40 people throughout fresh snow that had fallen and sort of go on this incredible kind of costume pageant. Duke Riley transforms spaces often into bars. This is the Dead Horse Inn, which is underneath an overpass on the Dead Horse Bay. And this is the Night Heron, which is a speakeasy inside a water tower on top of a building in Midtown. And finally, another collaborator and old friend and artist I admire very much, SWOON identifies New York City waterways as a place for culture as well. Working in these kind of spaces really changes the way that I think about them and the way that I see them, and I hope it's the way that I can transform the way an audience might see a space as well. So when I begin, I will start looking at a place that I see all the time. This is a New York City subway, kind of a beautiful station with a mural project. This is the kind of crazy hyper-surveillance. And I look at these places and I start thinking about the ways that I might be able to use them. This was for a show called IRT, which was a play that happened on the New York City subway system. And again, you started at the beginning of the story at one station, got on the train, and followed the story on and off platforms, on and off different trains. Every scene had costumes, sets, lighting, all of the sort of props, all the sort of trappings of theater. This is a film of 1905 happening on the subway, crowded in. This is about 40-person audiences per night. And the way that I ended up using these spaces is, you take a booth that has a fixed camera, and for the end of the story, we put an actor in front of that camera, and we're able to have that ghost character appear on this screen at the end of the show. And we used that original space, that beautiful subway station, as a ballroom in order to complete the show. So I'm hope that the public space is actually transformed longer than that very transitional, very ephemeral performance. Thank you.
I'm sort of overwhelmed by the artist, who I didn't know until this evening. I am not an artist. I run an island that serves as a platform, we hope. And when I was asked to do this, it was very cold. And so I thought to see a little video about what it's like for people to experience art in summer would help get us all in the mood. So we didn't make this video, the Public Art Review did, but it sort of has the audience and artists talking about what it's like to experience art on Governor's Island. So we'll roll that and then we'll all come and chat.
I don't know, I just like being next to the water. It's relaxing.
It's quite a big area for everyone to enjoy. I mean, we're excited. We came here pretty ready for our nice family picnic.
Governor's Island's a 172-acre island in the middle of New York Harbor, and a big part of what we do here is encourage all kinds of arts and culture, the broadest definition. In a 5-minute boat ride, you come to a place where you experience the sea and sky, and also all kinds of creativity.
Coming from the city, just this whole island in general, the atmosphere is like really nice and just totally different. It's it feels secluded from the city. It's not like loud. You can walk around, everyone's happy.
What's really exciting about today is we just opened this park. I'm sitting in a park that opened a few hours ago. And what's amazing is people are using it as if it's been here forever.
I think public art is cool. It gives you more a chance to kind of inspect it. I think public art is more creative because, you can climb on it and stuff like that. And I don't know, I just like sculpture.
In the public setting, you can, get yourself immersed in the art. And I think that's amazing.
Well, we haven't actually written anything in a while, so I thought it'd be cool to come out here to a place that we haven't been to before. And with all the modern art and all the new hype around it, I thought it'd be a really cool place to kind of try something new.
Being in a nice field and just seeing all these people out here exploring, and that was sparking some stuff, some fire under the belt.
We want to have our kids exposed to everything, like all types of cultures, and we think art is definitely an important part. Something that they really enjoy anyway.
Since our society is pretty tech savvy and everything is electronics, it's very important to maintain that outdoorsy cultural nature exposure for them.
There's another piece here that you can't see because it's a sculpture in sound. The artist Susan Phillips uses often her voice, but in this case a very popular and familiar tune to respond to the particular history of a place. Governor's Island is a former military base, so Susan chose to work with a very familiar tune, the bugle call of taps. And every evening when you leave the island, you will be able to hear Susan's reimagining of taps. But the art is not just in this new park, there's art everywhere.
We're working on the Achilles giraffe. It's a 17-foot digital fabrication piece, 1-to-1 scale, about the real height of a real giraffe. It came up to over 450 pieces, and we're assembling it now.
Using the geometric shapes like triangles, it sort of represents us as architects too. So instead of trying to be something curvy or something very close to what a giraffe would look like, we would use abstract shapes and really, help people understand that as architects we don't necessarily always build buildings, but we can build many other things with the tools that we're given.
We're building something interactive for all of them who come here during the summer.
It has chalkboard paint on it, so everybody that participates can write all over it. So the piece is sort of ever transforming into whatever people want to make it.
It's been really exciting to see how the island has been activated this first day.
It's a good place for people to enjoy the nature and also get acquainted with the arts and maybe even participate.
So these are reclaimed plastic cups, and in the end 30,000 clear plastic cups will be reincarnated or art incarnated into this installation.
The goal also was transform the trash into something really intricate and beautiful.
It's significant for us as architects to be involved like this, to be able to offer our work for the delight of the greater public.
Art, culture, and design were always at the heart of how Governor's Island came back to life and will be at the heart of why people enjoy this beautiful place going forward, really, for time immemorial.
It will be summer. We have a countdown clock on Governor's Island, so the rain is just a detour. I'm moving our seat up. So my first question to all of you is, you've chosen to make art in the public realm, and as you talked about, Jeff, collaboratively. I imagine that when you first began to work as artists, you may have been working in a smaller, more private scale, and if you could talk a little bit about each of your evolutions and the challenges of being an artist working in the public realm, outside the marketplace, outside of a lot of the traditional kind of conversation about how art is made, sold, displayed. So you want to start, Jeff?
Actually, I did not start smaller. I started bigger. And I professionally was a writer. I worked for alternative newspapers. I worked for online publications. And when I moved to New York City, I fell in with these bad kids who were running around the city in tunnels, putting on parades in the middle of the street without permission, and pretty much having more fun than anyone else was having. And I wanted to be involved with them, and I started working with them really closely. The group was called MATTA-CLARK Institute. Another one was called Dark Passage. They were closely related.
And aren't they officially called transgressive placemakers?
That term was not yet being used, but good term.
And Dee taught me that. He taught me that term.
Transgressive. We were doing a little bit of transgressing and a little bit of placemaking. But the thing that was really important for me at the time, and I've tried to carry it over myself, was that I didn't come to it feeling like an artist, and yet I felt like I could participate and I could be involved. And all of the work very much had ways for people to interface and become a part of it. And so as I started going into my own kind of work, that's something that's been really important to me, is trying to make sure that that those boundaries are very easy to cross, make sure that that everyone can sort of see the ways to participate and become parts of the works that I do.
Maya, you talked a little bit at the beginning about your transition from doing work in a more traditional way. Could you talk more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I share a lot of your feeling about participation. I started taking photographs when I was a kid. My dad was a geographer and my mom was a psychologist. And the camera to me became an access to punk shows and underground music, warehouse and whatever shows. And it gave me a place to participate. And as like a little girl, that wasn't there to get wasted, and I wanted to be involved in some way. So, and I always painted, I always drew, and I really didn't study painting because that it was not the time for that, and most painters were very tunnel visioned about it. So painting outside totally started out as a way of having fun, late at night, running around, seeing things. It eventually, yeah, I mean, the reason I shifted out of photography was really just because of digital photography coming along and not wanting to compete in that marketplace, because I printed everything myself in the color darkroom, and I was really into printing. So I had been painting for a very long time by that point, but as soon as I moved to New York, it was like this crossover happened, and I started working in a collective. And they taught me how to collaborate with one another, and it was mainly based on listening and looking at the overall picture and space, and having to really put aside your own ego. And it doesn't mean there weren't fights and things, but we worked really well together, and then that helped me learn how to paint. I used to paint in a very narrative way. I painted very sexually charged imagery, which I still think I do. It's just abstracted now, how drippy it is. I don't know, I'm kind of rambling, but I mean, you know, I felt like it, I felt like that was the transition there, and it's probably always going to be evolving, I hope so.
Heather, you want to talk a little bit about your trajectory to doing public work?
Sure. I think like I was a painting and video major in undergrad. And then in grad school, I did a lot more sculpture, though I said my father was a carpenter, so we grew up doing sculpture. And I was a furniture apprentice for like 3 years. I think realizing, like at the end of grad school, realizing that my practice was really schizophrenic and I needed to find kind of something that satisfied me and something that maybe coerced the viewers to be less passive. Like I wanted something to last outside the actual, I think you were saying this too, outside the actual art viewing experience, and because that's what I liked. And so I think, you know, just trying to kind of, I don't want to say be a trickster, but kind of play with that relationship a bit.
And Heather, you showed us two pieces that obviously are sort of similar in form, but in very different contexts. So one's in the museum we love, the Brooklyn Museum, another in a sculpture park, but one that's free and open to the public. I also used to live in Seattle. But could you talk a little bit about what it's like as an artist, the different context for pieces with similar vocabularies, you know, in these very different settings, and how that influenced both the viewer's experience of the work and your own understanding of your work?
Well, it's always exciting for me to take on a new public piece because there's a certain quotient that's completely unpredictable. Like you cannot guarantee understanding the public, and it frustrates me to see work that just kind of plops down into an unknown space and then leaves. You know, like an artist that's just kind of like a cultural tourist in a way.
Drive by.
Yeah, drive by. And so, like that unpredictability, that openness is really important for me to build into the concepts and spatial configuration of my work. But yeah, I mean, with those two pieces in particular, it was really interesting. Like, I think the strongest difference was politics of Seattle versus New York. You know, in Seattle, they would walk by, and instead, you know, in Brooklyn, they would be fascinated with the process of building and in more of a fishbowl aspect. And then in Seattle, they would be like, where did you source these materials? Where are they going afterwards? You know, it's like, and of course, you know, I mean, it's Seattle. I grew up there. I should know that, you know.
They're now doing, I just read they're doing shaming and composting. If you put in food scraps, they stick a red sticker. And I was like, that's the town I used to live in. Yeah, they're very...
Yeah, so I mean, I don't want to be completely ignorant about a space. I'm not going to just, but I also want it to be my perspective in that space. You know, I want to be self-conscious.
And you showed us some images. One was Bonnaroo and one was a Miami Art Fair, which are pretty different. And so obviously you're working with the same patterns, but how does watching sort of, you know, obviously people somewhat tripping in the Bonnaroo context versus art shopping, how does that affect your experience of the work you've created?
Well, I mean, not sort of tripping, like super tripping. So I super was aware. Oh yeah. No. I mean, it's hilarious. It's a pretty wide, broad spectrum.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that's something also exciting about it is that it winds up being in a context that people wouldn't expect it. When they go to an art fair, they're expecting to see art, you know, certainly. But yeah, it was great to think about like what people's perception of it would be at Bonnaroo, and there was a lot of very, very drippy, mushy paint that, you know, photographs of these things are always funny because they turn the imagery into very graphic, sort of almost vector-looking paintings, but when, you know, up close, they're super duper messy. So I was imagining how someone who might be, you know, like in a psychedelic headspace would enjoy that spaceship or whatever they were on. And for the art fair, I mean, that might be the art fair was at the Wynwood Walls. So the context was street art, which was, you know, this big explosion that's happened over the last like 15 years or so. And yeah, and just like transgressive street art, the term hadn't been coined, really wasn't like part of our vocabulary yet. But I'm mainly thinking about the architecture, the space, the place, the light, the how much time I have, the height of the ladder, things like that that have to do with how that piece identifies in the space, and I would hope that people would identify with it once it's in there. But I feel like, I mean, there are spaces that I have not painted because nothing belongs there. You know, like I generally am painting and thinking like, what do you need? What else do you need? And I'm asking the wall that, and then hopefully it's, you know, complete. But it's always, I can always walk away from it like, and I can always keep going on it, and that's part of the process for me as well.
We've hosted an enormous range of art projects, so one of the points I like to make is that piece, even though it's temporary, becomes part of the history of the place. And you don't have to have seen it or experienced it for it still to have residue. And I, too, live near the Gowanus, and I was not one of the lucky 18, nor did I have my act together to go along the canal and see it. But Jeff, can you talk a little bit about what, because you live in the neighborhood and you created this work, but what does it mean that that ship sailed in the Gowanus at that moment and disappeared? We may not see it again, but both as the creator of the piece, but also as a community member.
It becomes part of the myth and part of the story of the place. And that's the idea. And it's done in a pretty calculated way. I spent about, I guess, 10 years really trying to figure out documentation, really like just, you know, trying video, trying film, trying photographs, trying talking head videos, books, publications, any you know, websites, and what I discovered over time was that the best possible documentation for these kinds of things, which are actually, you know, heavy performance, are photographs and media accounts. And I use photographs. I do use some video, but I always bring the same photographer, Todd Seeley. I usually bring a couple of other photographers as well. And photographs allow for you guys to imagine the spaces in between those photographs, and it allows you to sort of construct that event as it happened. And that mythos is better for me and for this work than any piece of video. And one of the ways that I came about that is by looking at these people who I really respect and admire, and I look at their shoddy documentation. For me, Splitting by Gordon MATTA-CLARK, which is basically like a photograph from the outside, 20 photographs from the interior, 1 3-minute video, Super 8 film of an incredibly hot, shirtless Gordon MATTA-CLARK with a Sawzall. Those things are far more evocative of that piece and allow me to get inside what he was trying to communicate and what he was trying to do. Even though the piece was immediately bulldozed, I will never be able to walk inside of that house. I was able to experience it from that fragmented documentation and those media accounts.
Yeah, one of the favorite pieces we ever hosted was a fake archaeological dig, and a number of years ago, and many people who went through it thought it was a real archaeological dig. And it was so fantastic, and it was only up for 3 weeks, and so I'm still haunted by the memory of it, but that's almost the beauty. And the artist came to visit, and he gave me an artifact from it, and it was sort of like I was trying to hold on to this memory, and I was like, I just have to, like, the artifact doesn't matter. It's really that sense of it having disappeared. Can you all talk about obviously the virtue of doing art in the public realm is the public. And there's all this sort of, you talked a little bit about this in terms of your 2 pieces, but sort of favorite surprises or encounters and sort of the change of meaning that the public is bringing to your work because you're willing to take that risk and be in the public realm, just sort of stories you might each want to share about different experiences.
Okay, let's see. They're all, I mean, I think with the Numinous Negro piece, it's been pretty impressive with the performer. Each time that we've done that, we've had at least one person come out in tears. And I like playful work, so that was kind of unexpected. And with the Porch Project, I've had people, stage is an easy read for it, and I've had people have nostalgia about the smell of the wood. But also there was a woman from Cuba who was like, oh, it's like a pallet raft, right? So everybody's got their own read to it.
Other surprises from your public?
There's always surprises in public. But just to start with, the first thing is that I'm the public, and all 50 of us who are working on that show are the public, and every audience person, whether they're on the boat or in the neighborhood, is a public as well. And I think that that's actually really key. And sort of in terms of it as a theatrical work, one of the things that I want to do is I want to invite an audience to remember that they are part of the show. And so, what we do is Sarah McMillan, our costume designer, she made 100 costumes for this piece so that we could put a costume on each person in the audience. And that's a reminder that that audience member is actually, even if they're on the boat watching the show, they are actually being watched by other people, and they are performers themselves. And so we start to kind of create these circles of publics. That doesn't answer your question. Some of the unexpected things in this last one, my girlfriend had a gun pulled on her by NYPD because she was burning candles at the public boat launch. We had one of our people arrested at one of the sites that we were using. But then there are also things that are kind of really fun and delightful, like for IRT, we really felt like we were kind of constantly on the run. And then it turned out that because we were wearing these funny old-timey costumes, everybody was just, totally charmed by the whole crew. And so the subway workers would just start opening the doors for us every night and say, like, you guys here for your show? Have a good performance, so people, there's this sort of antagonism because we live in New York and everybody hates everything, but there's also this love and this invitation and this warmth and acknowledgement for doing something that's sort of part of the cultural fabric of the city.
The other part of the public is, of course, people like me, right? We're public officials. And we have never pulled a gun on someone. We don't have any guns on Governor's Island. But I'm curious what you would say. You've talked a little bit in both Maya and Jeff, in both your work, you're dealing with gentrification and obviously the change in those, the building's literally gone where you painted a mural and the Gowanus is slipping as we sit here. But what do you want people like me, right, who kind of control the public, we're paid to control the public realm, what can we do to make it easier for you and your collaborators to realize work?
I just talked.
Yeah, I know, and I don't have an answer for that. I was totally about to answer the other question about the unexpected. Can I answer that one?
Well, that seems like the question was unexpected.
Yeah. So I know, I'm like, oh, that's unexpected. I actually can't, I feel like I have a good roll, the ball is rolling almost too quickly for me right now where my public has expanded, I think everyone's public has expanded to being a really, really vast circle that goes so far out and very global now, which is something that was not expected when I started painting outside and running around and splattering paint around, and that was certainly not part of the objective either. But it is pretty wild to feel that familiarity of that, that global environment now. But, geez, what can the public do? I don't have I would appreciate it if people would not lean against the wall while I'm painting. That would help me a lot because I always get, people will do the same pose. It's this, where they lean their back up and their foot, and blows my mind that they're putting their feet into wet, drippy paint and they're leaving footprints. I know that's probably not the most important thing to be concerned about, but I love that people are excited while it's happening, but that would be kind of nice if that didn't happen. Something that unexpected, though, that used to happen that's hilarious now in retrospect is that if I did have somebody watching my back, and I have always done all my own painting, but there would always be somebody who is just like looking out for me, and the public would always compliment that person, who is generally a male, on his work. And it was mind-blowingly hilarious because my one friend, Nick, would always say, "Oh, thanks, where have you seen my work?" You know, like that's fantastic. So, you know, and or while I'd be painting, they would ask me who it is I'm working for. You know, whose artwork am I painting, or what does the original drawing look like that I'm making a painting of? So
all the time.
Hilarious. Like, who are you working for? So those are just hilarious things that like we have encountered, and that was part of what was exciting about being anonymous for a while was that. But what else can the public do? I don't know. Bring me baked goodies when I don't have a good answer. I know you're okay.
No, there's not. I do bake on occasion, but I don't usually bring it to the artist. But now I will add. I'll make a bigger batch when I make brownies.
So I'm going to be a little snotty.
Okay.
And I'm going to bite the hand that feeds.
Okay.
Because you're asking me, and you're sort of coming from a really generous place, and it's really nice. And I actually believe that you want to help me, and you want to help a lot of other people. But I started working in the places that I work so that I wouldn't have to ask you. Because everyone I knew was asking you, or everyone I knew was asking someone else for permission to make work. Can I get a grant? Can I get a gallery show? Can I get a retrospective? Can you sponsor my studio? Can I be part of this group show? Constantly asking. We're constantly asking people, even in the public realm. Hey, Public Art Fund, I have a proposal for you. Hey, how the hell do I get a creative capital grant? I sure would like $50,000 to make a project. We're constantly asking. And my work and the work of the people who I admire the most basically said, fuck you. Fuck you. I'm not waiting for you to find me on stage at Kickstarter and ask me what I need. I've been making work for 10 years now because I didn't wait for you to say that. And that's what I guess all of the work that all of these people are doing, it says like, this stuff that we're doing, we care about it so much, and we're going to make it with or without you. So I desperately want to work with you. I want to get in your vent tunnel on Governor's Island. I want to. That belongs to the MTA. I want to like get in the abandoned buildings there, and I want to like make giant fire pieces on Governor's Island, and have boat regattas, and I want to do all kinds of things. But it's important to me that I and that we aren't always asking for permission. That we actually use public space because it's public, and because it's free, and because we get to do whatever we want there.
Just a small point of clarification, that's actually not the way we work. So we have no money, we just have an open platform. If you want to do something on Governor's Island, you just type in, you get a space, and we have nothing to do with it. And that's exactly why we do it that way. We don't have any money, we don't select, we don't care, we don't actually give permission. So
Yeah, you're right, but LMCC, which is like one of the biggest, sort of gatekeepers onto the island, at least that's the way they present themselves.
I'm sorry.
Their studio program?
If you want to get a space in their building, you go to LMCC.
Yeah.
So the only thing that they control is their space.
Yeah.
We have 150,000 square feet of other space indoors and 25 acres of space outdoors. That is available free of charge to anyone who wants to make a project. So
let's applaud that.
Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about your other favorite? Can we talk about your other project that I love?
Which one?
Your driving project.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's another, if you didn't go to the Queens Museum to experience the drive-ins, the only other problem we have is that we can't host their drive-in project because we're not open at night yet. So we just came up with an idea, we hope, for toy cars indoors and have a little indoor daylight drive-in. But that is exactly why we do things the way we do, which is, and actually, quite frankly, I get beat up more from the art world because I don't have any standards. And I just gave a presentation the other day, and they said, well, what's happening in Governor's Island? And I said, I have no idea, because I'll see it when you see it, when we open in May. And that's the truth. Yeah. And that's a very heretical approach, and we love it because it gives anyone who wants to create something, and we are very grateful to Kickstarter, who's funded who's helped enable many projects on Governor's Island to happen, because we think New York needs a place like that, in part, and that's why I asked the public question, in part because you're not going to get arrested if you do a project on Governor's Island, and we're not going to chase you off the property. Why don't we?
I've been chased.
Duke Riley's been, if he comes in at night in a kayak. Why don't we open it up to the world at large? You guys have been super patient, and questions, comments, conversation. Take it away.
Hey, thank you for your presentations. They were all really illuminating, and really like the breadth of work going on. And I just had a question. This is really boring and technical. Insurance. Like, how do you guys deal with insurance? Do you have a larger studio or gallery that you're working for, or do you get sanctioned by some sort of organization? Is insurance an issue? Go.
See, my work is less in the guerrilla realm than these two, and so actually that was going to be my comment for the last question. I almost always have an institution that is sponsoring me in some way, and so they have their own lawyers and inspectors and constraints for me before I start a project. And I think that would be my request to someone like you is, I've done a couple of projects independently, but it's not easy to go through all the bureaucratic permits for yourself, and you do need permits for even like a sound, amplification. So maybe some sort of like, some place that we could go to get guidance in order to see a project through independently of these institutions would be good.
What do you need insurance for? Seriously.
You're not worried about somebody coming after you?
That's what do you need insurance for?
I mean, we can talk about that later.
Have people used Fractured Atlas for insurance? Anybody? So,
I have.
And what's your thought on that?
Terrible.
Can you elaborate?
I'm going to just bite the hand that feeds all night long. But yeah,
Kickstarter, you're next.
No, Kickstarter has been great to me. I had a bad experience with Fractured Atlas. Other people I know have had bad experiences with Fractured Atlas, specifically about their insurance. The financial umbrella thing for the nonprofit, people have great experience with that. I've heard fantastic things. But Fractured Atlas helps people who have pretty traditional projects get pretty traditional insurance. It seems that they're not as good as they once were getting insurance for things like rooftops that are on the sides of hills in public parks. I don't know about that. So I wasn't able to get Fractured Atlas. I was in fact canceled from Fractured Atlas for the Drury Coast. However, I did get a policy through another organization. I went through a theater broker. Basically, you find somebody who works in a realm that's similar to the one that you're interested in. You find out who their broker is. That broker has those relationships. It's actually pretty cheap to get event insurance for minimal coverage. And then also, for the older projects that I've done, I haven't always used insurance. Sometimes I use waivers, sometimes I use trust.
And it changes with every site too, every location. New York is pretty strict compared to other cities.
Other questions, comments?
Yeah, hi, thank you. Hi, so this question's for Heather. You mentioned that you had to do a Kickstarter for your Brooklyn Museum project. Can you talk a little bit about that, where you got an institution to back you and then you still had to get your own funding, like that process and how that worked?
Sure. So I was selected for their Rock Hooked series, and they have a predetermined endowment for that. And I knew that before I pitched my project, and so I felt like it was an opportunity that I wanted to go kind of bigger because they had the space. They just didn't have any more funding than what they had put on the table. And so at that point, I talked to Kickstarter and started my deficit there.
And how, can you tell us a little bit more how much you raised? And
Yeah, I think it was like $7,500.
other questions, comments in front?
Yeah, this is for Jeff. So for your subway shows, were the audience people that had purchased tickets, or was this something that they would just see and then start running after the show and kind of following it along in that regard?
Did everybody hear the question? So the question was, for IRT, which was the subway show, did people buy tickets, or did they just kind of catch the show and join in? So the answer is both. It was designed for, I believe, a $15 ticket, which you bought at a pizza place. The pizza place told you where it started. You would go downstairs and join a small group. There would be a band on the platform. And then you would follow a guide onto a train, and she would sort of show you how to navigate the subway and let the story unfold. At the same time, that what I called secondary audience, which is the audience of people who happen to be on the train, people who were on the platform when we were doing a piece, that audience was really important to me. So I chose a form, which is melodrama, where when you simply look at the characters, you sort of understand the type that they are. So for example, the villain has a mustache. That way, if somebody just caught one scene, they would know that he was the bad guy, you know, and be able to enjoy at least that particular scene.
And how does the general public find out about that, or how would one of us be able to find one of your shows?
I put out a list called Nonsense NYC, and it's a list that's dedicated to unusual events, independent, do-it-yourself happenings that happen all throughout the city. And I always list all the stuff that I do on Nonsense.
Hello. The three of you are great, by the way. You're great at what you do. And Jeff, I admire your theatrical approach to commanding a public space. And you mentioned a visit from New York's finest. Could you talk a little bit more about that? And this question could also translate to the rest of you. At what point does art become delinquency? And do you ever find yourselves being creatively stifled for the sake of getting consent for a public space, or falling in line with public regulations and standards? How does an artist deal with, as Jeff said, asking around?
That's a lot of questions. So can I talk more about that interaction with the cop? Is that's the first thing you said? Yes. Right, so every event, every sort of public, private, transgressive, minor, major trespassing event that I do has a different strategy. The strategy for the Drury Coast was, we live here. We live here, this is public, we're allowed to be here. And so we acted like we belonged there, and we did that over time. And so what that means is, very early on, we were very public in our scouting. After that, we were going down for rehearsals, going down for color tests under the lights, going down and doing weird stuff all the time. And over time, the neighborhood starts to see you. They ask, what are you building here? What, you know, you become part of that fishbowl effect. And the police are part of it. Often they're really bored. And so in this particular instance, the NYPD showed up and kind of came around this corner with their guns out, and my girlfriend looked at them and said, "Are you kidding me? How don't you know what's going on down here? You guys have been down here every night for the last 3 weeks. What the fuck is wrong with you? Did anyone tell you that we're doing this?" And basically shamed the guy into holstering his gun and apologizing. So, you know, like, and as we moved into the show, we basically allowed them to make fun of us. We allowed them to see what we were doing for 95% of the time. And we just engaged them because we live there and because it's our neighborhood as well. And so that was the strategy for that particular show. Other times, the strategy is like, avoid them altogether. And we go to great lengths to do that.
Heather, I have a question for you. You mentioned that unlike the other projects we were talking about, you're usually doing them sort of within an institution. The piece outside was in a sculpture park that's run by a museum. Can you talk a little bit about the role of a curator? Because obviously you're collaborating with other people, not just in the realization of the work, but the conceptualization and what that difference is in that kind of collaboration, curator-artist in a public project.
Well, the curator is normally the bridge. You know, they're the person that knows the community best. They usually come to me with either a space constraint or like attracted to a specific piece. And then when I can talk to them about the community and figure out what would be the most appropriate. And I mentioned that public programming is really important to me, and that is a huge collaboration that the curators need to be a part of, because, you know, I might have this list of 20 ideas, but as far as like which musicians are most like applicable to my concepts, I don't really know that. They'll have to like help me find those people and make the connection. Yeah.
And listening to this conversation, does that tempt you at all to kind of go out in a more public realm outside of an institution to create a work? Or what do you think the trade-offs are in doing that?
The breadth of my practice is pretty wide, and so there's a branch that does that a lot, and then there's a branch that is more appropriate in an institutional setting, kind of because of that commentary.
And how is your experience as an artist different when you're on one branch versus the other?
I guess with the more, I don't even know what to call it, guerrilla style work, it's less predictable. So I have a wider idea of what the variables of what could happen. And therefore, for me, in the way that I work, probably not the way that you guys work, I have to be even more anal retentive about trying to constrain those things, because no matter what I do, that'll, you know, explode a bit. So I like to kind of, you know, make sure I have like my sound permits and everything, you know, so that I don't have things that I don't need shut down. It's probably also I think it, like as an artist, I'm really conscious of this privileged point of view that I have, and whereas like people like my brother or something like that, I don't think that they would like literally would not get away with things that we are all doing. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's a really important thing for me too, is to recognize my position and the power that it has as far as being that, like, being able to talk a policeman down in front of a candle.
Absolutely.
You know.
Yeah. Our answer is always just, it's art. You know, and if something's happening, we don't recognize it. And once in a while it's construction, but if we just say it's art, and then I don't have to explain it, and it goes on.
Mine is it's a student film.
Student film, there you go.
Use that one.
No one wants to participate in a student film. No one wants anything to do with it. They're just like,
Well, because it also negates the need for permits where they're like, oh, don't you know, I don't even, yeah, exactly. Yeah. I totally turned that. I remember the moment where I passed the age where it was plausible anymore.
I'm holding on.
Oh, you're holding on? I'm
holding
like,
on.
I'm going to call the, like, I'm a teacher. It's a student.
Elder hostel. We're going to be eligible for elder hostel soon, so we'll be able to. We just say it's always art. Other questions?
That's nice.
Yeah.
Oh, question for Jeff. Thank you. Question for Jeff. What was the initial spark for the Gowanus project?
Did everybody hear that, the spark for the Gowanus project?
What was the initial spark for the Gowanus project? It was actually a canoe trip that I took with an activist named Luger Bowen, who is an amazing activist. He has worked on the Gowanus Canal for many, many years and was one of the activists that very much led to it being designated a Superfund site. I was on a canoe trip with Luger that he was guiding people in the neighborhood. The strategy of the activists at that time was, we need to get more people on this canal so they can see how bad it is. They need to see how horribly polluted it is. And so this guy was on this canoe as we were moving down the canal, and he was describing the sort of history of the industrial horrors that had happened. That was the place where a guy at a gas station poured benzene into the canal for 20 years. That was the paint factory that dumped all their paint directly into the canal. Opening right there today allows sewage to flow directly down the hill from Park Slope right into the canal. And this guy was literally a guide through hell. And for me, I took that guy, Luger, and Luger's activism, and I said, he's like Karen, the boatman on the River Styx, and he's guiding us through this space. So that was my, and I often look to activists and look to their particular tactical strategies and use them. I was deeply influenced by Reclaim the Streets, a group out of England who kind of took over public space to remind people to use it. And I think that it's one of the things that artists can do is take those tactics, run with them, and give them back to the activists. And we kind of start having a conversation about tactics and a conversation about ways to be in public and ways to interact, often toward the same goals.
Is there a hand in the back? Yep. Time for two more? Oh, time for two more. Are there two more? Yes, ma'am.
I have a comment and a question. The comment is for Maya. I think the people asking you if you were an assistant is a testament to how amazing your work is. Because normally, you know, an assistant would be doing it, not necessarily the artist, I would think. And then I have a question for you two from Seattle. You seem to roll your eyes about being asked if your wood was sourced or the food compost. I'm just wondering if it's offensive to you because it seems like you're being policed, like restricted, or just kind of riffing off you, Jeff, being upset about like people saying like, no, you can't go here, and then whether it's upsetting to be like, oh, you can't use whatever materials you want.
No, I think it wasn't necessarily eye-rolling. It was just a familiarity that I hadn't thought of in a long time. I think I've been in New York for 13 years, and we barely even recycle here. It's crazy, you know? So like going back there and people actually being concerned about not the project, but the materials was like, you know, jarring, I guess, in a way. And it was interesting though, because we had kind of like a good heated discussion. You know, it's like we had tried to source the materials as recycled, but it ended up being more expensive that way, and they didn't have the budget for it. Yeah, I know. Bigger issue, right? But I think one of the reasons I like doing installations publicly like that in the fishbowl is because of the discussions. You know, I get to feel what people are thinking about my work beforehand, what their motivations are, because I think my goal is to have that kind of resonance after the piece is done, and I'm kind of against video documentation as well because I think it creates like a voyeur aspect. So the only way that I'm going to hear about my impact is firsthand conversations and debates, and I love that. So.
And I think I too was a Seattleite. I was born there. I lived there for 14 years, and it's really more about their different values in different communities. And I think you're right that you forget. And you know, we hosted a huge set of projects that Creative Time did a number of years ago, and it's an amazing story about the creation of public art. Mark Wallinger did a piece, and it was on our. You know, there were a lot of very complicated pieces, installation, we deal with things like permits, but this piece seemed really simple because it was 2 signs. One said sheep and one said goats. And the idea, the premise that Wallinger had was that you're making a choice. And whether you're going to go on the left side, the port side, or the starboard side of the boat. And the operator of our boat is devout Catholic, and he immediately recognized that imagery as being religious. And he found it really offensive. And also, from a safety standpoint, worried that everyone would understand it and only want to go on the sheep side. And so, I mean, and this is like after we had projects that were going to have live animals, and I mean, just things that logistically seemed much more complicated, like staging a play in the middle of a Superfund site. And this was, you know, the installation was putting up 2 signs. And so what was ironic about it, so we, Ann Pasternak, who runs Creative Time, spent a long time with him, and you know, and he sort of, and the artist. And what was interesting was that I think he understood the piece more than all of the art going public who just saw it as 2 signs. Mm-hmm. And so you have to respect, you know, that's what's so amazing about creating art or hosting art in the public realm, is you have that conversation that, right, you'd had your punch list, 1,000 things, and it didn't occur to you, and if you did that same piece in a different community, you would have gotten a different set of questions. And then as the artist or as the presenter, or in our case as the venue, you then have to have that conversation because you're putting yourself out there in the public realm, and you owe that respect to the public to understand that. So I do compost in Brooklyn, my little way, and bring it to Governor's Island, where we have a composting program. But it's more that it's a reminder that in different communities, how they even look at the material of a project is going to rank very differently. And that's what I think, at least for me as someone who gets to experience the art that you create, I find so exciting about that interchange that I think changes the meaning of it. So I didn't want you to think that I didn't respect composting or my friends in Seattle.
I think incidentally, I think he had other issues where the site for my piece was about 100 feet in front of an Alexander Calder that he visited every day, and he thought it was obstructing his view. So there's that. And he was a little satiated that we donated the materials afterwards. But
great. I think we're all...
Can I just say, I guess that is my goal, I would guess, would be to be more concerned about environmental things, but I'm just curious if maybe if I got what I wished for, if it would be really restrictive and like... I think awful for art.
I mean, I think when anything is a new trend, it tends to be distracting to people, you know. When video art started, it was like, you know, people were doing all of this like After Effects and stuff like that, getting distracted in CG and films. Now that it's a little older, people are using it more strategically, and I think, you know, maybe eventually people will see environmentalism as just like a normal part of your work instead of being distracted by that whole box that they're trying to push you into. That's my hope.
I think we've run out of time, but I know we're going to continue the conversation, and I know that we are very grateful on Governor's Island for Kickstarter, which has helped enable so many people to realize projects, and this is also an amazing space with reclaimed wood, I know, but really just an incredible addition to Greenpoint, so thank you for hosting this.